We're live. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name's Tre, and I have Sandy with us. Why did I start the stream? Who am I? Blah, 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 blah. So, if you haven't gone to the Fountain of Comfort website, you should. And if you go there, you'll see my name as one of the secretaries on the Fountain of Comfort team. And I sort of wanted to create a stream. You know, it's Autism Awareness Month, and the goal of Fountain of Comfort is to sort of merge the ideas of spirituality and mental health. And in our Autism Awareness Month, I sort of wanted to talk about those intertwinings. So, who am I and how do I relate to this? Well, my name's Tre. I was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. And I put in a lot of work. And at the age of 16, I joined the Jehovah's Witnesses. And through the Jehovah's Witnesses, I was able to develop practices and skills to basically make it so I was able to overcome a lot of my autistic symptoms and develop strategies for that. So I kind of wanted to reflect on that experience and sort of talk about how those systems sort of helped me. Yeah. Sandy, how do you relate to this topic?
My oldest of 2 sons was diagnosed at 3.5 with autism. He was also born, well, I'd say born deaf. He was a blue baby. He had the cord around him. So it could have been genetic and part of some other stuff he had going, or it could have been lack of oxygen, or it could have been both. But for me, the combination of having a child with autism and other communication issues. And actually, his dad and brother both have variations on some of the communication issues, listed as ADHD and central auditory issues. But yeah, so I've had a lot of fun in kind of making things up as we go.
Okay. What religious community were you a part of during that time? I know it's complicated, but
well, actually, during the time when I was raising my sons, we were only in 2 churches up until when they were both in high school. We were in the Christian Reformed Church in Canada, and then both of my boys were volunteering. Well, actually, and later my younger son was working at a small nonprofit that was tied to a church plant through the Christian Missionary Alliance Church. So we did a little bit of a back and forth there, but kind of maintained connection through both of those communities.
How did the CRC sort of understand your sons?
In some ways they did, and in a lot of ways they didn't. I found they have like really good programs and things for certain things. So they have a disability concerns network, and I found myself getting volunteered for things. It wasn't so much the church structure that understood my 2 boys in terms of some of the needs. It would be more individual people that attended the church. You know, that you would find certain people that were really good at connecting. But the structure wasn't designed really for dealing with disability at all.
Did your church structure like what did they ask of Jacob? I guess like what was?
Good question. Sorry, that was half of your question.
No, that was it.
Oh, okay. What did they ask of him? That's a long way back.
Well, like I can give my description. So, yeah. If you were an active male within the Jehovah's Witnesses, you were expected to go on stage and give public Bible readings in front of the whole congregation. Now, my congregation that I went to was about 115. So that was probably the most I've spoken to, and it's probably the most intimate you're supposed to do it. But each of the speakings had informations of sort of how to get over your anxiousness. So I was just curious, like, is there was there anything in the religious community that sort of like pushed your son to sort of speak, push me, or it could be worse, like he pushed me into bad situations?
Um, so I'm trying to think. In their CRC, they would be there till they were maybe like they had children's programs.
Mm-hmm.
And once you got over 12, then you either went to youth group or you were volunteering in cadets or Sunday school. They had but for Jacob, I think he got a little bit more involved. I was asking him. He got more involved as just as he was hitting kind of upper teens and adulthood with one of the programs that they had for uh, people with disabilities. Like usually, it was built around adults with disabilities. Usually, the majority of them were living in group homes or whatnot, so they were more people who were more severely disabled. And it was called Friendship Ministries. I was told to take Jacob there to that program because it would be something he could do because church, well, I'll come back to church, but the friendship club was interesting. He had, for some reason, he loved the music. He was wearing hearing aids at the time. No speaking language, very little sign language. Um, but was really interesting is they did action songs. And so the beginnings of some of his expressive communication was this one action song he liked. And the fact that he was then making the hand movements and stuff, and you would go up, they would have all of the people that were being supported go up on stage at the front. They would give them, instruments, same as you would do with, primary grades at school or something. But a lot of them just absolutely loved singing. And for some reason, Jacob also he loved going up to the front. He loved being part of the choir of people and doing the action songs. And I would sit in the pews and I would sign the words to the songs, and sometimes he would copy them. So, yeah.
Really cool. Um, yeah, wow. Yeah. Witnesses don't have any outside programs outside of the Kingdom Hall. It's sort of whatever is in it, but they sort of structure it in a way that it's very small steps. So if you are trying to be a convert like I was, the one thing that you try to do every meeting is you try to have a comment. So you study something and you raise your hand and everyone will look at you, and then someone will come over you with a mic and then sort of get it. I was completely deathly afraid of that. First of all, going to a place with random people I didn't know was also super super scary. Yeah, but you had everyone sort of encouraging you to do that. So once you sort of stepped over that barrier, you then sort of went into, okay, now when are you going to get up in front of us and read the Bible to all of us? And I was like, I'll never do that. That'll never happen. And it did. And then eventually I started preaching. And when you first time you preach, you're never going to be the first one to go to the door. There's always a second person with you. So you'll be the second person sort of looking at them give the presentation, and you'll sort of get over your nervousness. And for outside activities, I was just brought along to like just a bunch of like home sort of like family gatherings, but like to an isolated kid like me that didn't really know how to like navigate a lot of social situations, you had a bunch of people who are willing to sort of bend over backward to just talk to you, get to know you, and sort of like welcome you in. And I think that because there was a difference between the outside world and who's in, your differences of friends became less. Like usually, like a lot of things, like you get mad over somebody and you like stop being friends with them. That couldn't really exist because you see them all the time, and it's like, well, you only got 5 people to really hang out with. So it's a weird experience, just saying in general with the witnesses, because it's like they gave me everything. Like I would not be able to talk to you, even though it doesn't look like it, just because of the experiences I've gained. So.
Well, one of the people I knew in the the Alliance Church. Her daughter was involved with, is it Toastmasters or one of those programs that, I don't know if they have Toastmasters in the States, but in Canada, they have this thing called Toastmasters where you go and they walk you through a process of teaching you how to do a presentation. And that's what it sounds like you had with the witnesses, that you had people willing to support you while you did that, which for somebody with autism, having a pattern to follow and people to model and that whole thing
Yes.
would be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the difference that I didn't really see in schools, I didn't really see optimism in a pattern. Like I got a lot of talks from school, like, okay, we're gonna teach you how. Like I went to two different schools, one with people who were, I guess you could say, low functioning, and then another school that was a little bit more high functioning. And the people at the first school were did not give any really exercises to believe you can get out of your circumstances. Um, and I think that the witnesses tried their best pretty much to get you out of this, and it works, you know. And that's always a question I have: is it like, does pushing people who are neurodivergent help them, or does it just always hurt them? I don't know.
Hmm. Wouldn't it? I would guess it would depend on what you mean by pushing them.
Um,
Oh, like,
well, like I don't think there's any schools that are telling people, I want you to talk to random people, and I want you to understand social situations. That doesn't work. Like usually, you're you're neurodivergent, you're beat up, and you're like, okay, I have to figure this out because it's not going to go well. You know?
yeah, I kind of felt lucky in a way that Jacob was deaf, because it meant that like his brother was in all regular school system,
Mm,
um, kind of on the verge of normal, but a little some learning differences.
mm,
Um, nothing that would get him a significant label. I don't think. Well, I guess ADHD was a label back then, but um, mostly just because they wanted you to sit quiet in class and behave.
yeah.
But like he'd be in with a group of 30 students, and you have to pick up the cues and things. I remember his grade 3 teacher apologizing to me because she said, I don't know if Joshua says anything at home, but sometimes I feel like I'm yelling at him because when I speak to him in a normal voice, he doesn't seem to be able to actually hear me. And when I speak in a louder, sharper tone, it kind of like it would break things into segments he could process.
Mm,
Um, and understanding, yeah. I remember with him at one point he was having difficulty. He was having difficulty in high school, so they decided that he probably shouldn't be in the whatever the academic level English was for university. He should be in more of the general English for college level or whatever, because he wasn't completing the assignments properly on time. You know, and so Joshua comes home and he said, how was English? He goes, mostly I just sit in the hall by myself and I read a book. He goes, I don't know what they were thinking, but at the general level, they all use tape recorders and audio things and they listen. He goes, do you think they heard us when we said that I have an auditory processing disorder? And the teacher goes, I don't know why you're here. This is the absolute wrong place for you. So yeah, even teachers can kind of not get it. But with Jacob, his class, because it was in provincial deaf school, he'd have 6 to 8 students in the class. They were all sort of into group, and he had a mixture of students in his class simply because the whole school was a little smaller.
mm.
So eventually he was in a more not graded. You know, Eventually he got put in with just an all boys group. The
Okay.
girls were kind of fighting. I don't know what they were, and so they kind of separated them out and dealt with them differently. And then the boys tended to all have just like a lag in some of their skill sets for different reasons with the deafness. It wasn't just that they necessarily had an autism or other diagnosis. Some of them did, and some of them were just deaf. But so that was interesting because you'd get really competent children who were deaf children from deaf parents and knew sign language practically from birth. And then you'd get all the kids from hearing parents, like Jacob was, where hopefully we have enough sign language learned that we can walk through some of the conversations. But it was a smaller class, and that was good for him. He had the same people in the class all through, which sounds like there's only 6 of us. Yeah, you don't fight. It's what's
yeah, you don't fight because it's like you're gonna see each other the next day, and I feel like you get over differences better.
Yeah.
How did you like the routine of church?
He was okay with it when he was little. Of course, I don't really know how well the hearing aids work, but when he was little, he didn't necessarily completely understand when he was being loud or not quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the old mainline kind of church buildings, the original CRCs with the long wooden pews and stuff. And I don't know if it's like that in every church, but a lot of churches, nobody will sit in the front row. They just don't. They don't want to. And that's where I would take my kids, and we would sit up front. I'd bring a bag of books or toys or things, paper or something to occupy them. And they would both sort of sit up there and fidget. And yeah.
See, no one told me church etiquette, and I haven't been to a church since then. So I would always sit at the front because I was like, well, I want to hear what they're saying. I want to be at the front of the thing. And then what I would also do is anytime someone would raise their hand and ask a question or make a comment, because oh yeah, I should probably give context to that. How it works is that within the Kingdom Hall, there's basically a sermon. Then there's pretty much questions and answers. Witnesses are very big on questions and answers. You'll read a paragraph, and then the person, the pastor, pretty much will will say, "What did this Bible person think?" And then everyone will raise their hand, and then the mic will come over. So anytime anybody would do that, I would be twisting my head back and forth, looking.
He was going to answer.
I was always curious who was talking. There's sounds coming from everywhere.
Yeah. Jacob loved the sermons, funnily enough. When we got to the little Alliance Church, they had maybe a 30-something-year-old pastor, and he was one of these guys, really dug into it. He'd spend the whole week studying something, and then he'd come and he'd talk about it. And I'd always be explaining to Jacob what was being said. And yeah, it was interesting because you could watch Jacob's face would tell you what he was thinking about it. And sometimes he would just be so big a smile, he would just be glowing. And anybody behind us, it was embarrassing afterwards because they'd all come up and go, oh, watching you tell Jacob, sign to Jacob. And it's like, they love watching his face, So.
Yeah. I had the same thing. I think there was just something when you get a really in-depth sermon and you go any other way and you start really thinking about all the complexities. I think one thing I always really liked, so when you're starting to become a witness, you'll have these things called Bible studies, where it'll pretty much be that question answer. And I was a person who would think of 20 other different questions and just make them go in circles. Oh, did Jacob do the same?
He has questions because his language was limited. He would ask some questions, but only to me, not to other people. And so even he always wants to know, well, Jesus died, but he's alive. And Like he wants to know the health aspects, as in, so there's death, but there's resurrection, and like again and again, the same question over and over, safe. He's going to be safe. Everybody's saved. So kind of thing. Very repetitive, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, and he thinks about a lot of things.
Yeah, I did the same. We got to the Garden of Eden, they were explaining it, and I basically asked them, why didn't Adam burn the tree? Why didn't he build a moat around the tree? And I kept making more and more questions about, like, why did he go near the tree? Why didn't he just do and they were just like, they kept answering it, which I was like, okay, I'm going to still keep asking about this tree. Yeah. And then you mentioned that he had auditory issues. I had a question.
Well, yeah, I mean, he did have a hearing loss,
Yes.
and it got worse as he got older.
Mm-hmm.
As a baby, they tested it was 85 decibels. We put hearing aids on, then he should be able to hear down to 65 decibels, which is perfectly normal, assuming that they're all balanced how they should be. But he didn't actually manage to get any speech. But so I think it somehow, they say there's auditory processing sometimes with autism, like
Yeah.
how the sound goes in and out. And his dad and brother had variations of that. So watching some of Jacob, I think it sounds silly to say a deaf person had auditory problems, but yes, I think so.
Okay. Because I was curious, did he have any auditory sensitivity?
Possibly. I was telling the worker from today when we were waiting through he had a test. I was telling her that I'm going to lose my word and train of thought. Did he have processing? I was telling her that when he was quite young, he would copy sounds. So I would make sound patterns for him because he wasn't using words. I think some of that was he had trouble forming consonant sounds because of the bone issues he was born with. He had surgery for something called cranial synostosis. Sounds really fancy. It's stuck head in Latin. Basically, the bones kind of join and get. So I think he did understand some things, but I noticed if I asked him to copy a sound pattern, just like vowel sounds, like go up and down pitch, he had trouble copying me. But if he made one and I copied him and got it right, he looked pleased. So he seemed to understand the auditory sound, like the sounds going in. But it was that connection place was kind of hard with turning it back around and responding. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, I was just curious.
Like that, yeah.
Because I know that definitely at church it could be a bunch of loud sounds that could be sort of overwhelming. I surprisingly was okay with it. I think the place I always had trouble was coffee shops. I think there was just so many different types of sounds, and like the pitches of sounds would always be too much.
Well, Jacob did have some, and I don't know if it was allergies. I talked to my aunt about this, and my aunt had some like she was sensitive to food colors, MSG, some different chemical things, and Jacob seemed to be too. So he had this overwhelming thing where if I was signing to him, he might like jump back a bit. And she told me that if she had something that made her system oversensitive, like like MSG and stuff, her eyes would feel like they went like this, and then the ceiling would feel like it was kind of, so it would create this. I don't even know what kind of pattern that would be, but would definitely be disorienting. So yeah, but because his ears were kind of like he had the volume on the hearing aid, you could turn things up and down, you just wouldn't be able to hear. So with him, when things became loud, like a coffee shop, he just wouldn't be able, to hear it. He would hear noise, but not stuff.
Do you think there's any spiritual concepts that have affected how his autism, how it's perceived, or how it's sort of managed with?
How it's perceived. So Jacob really likes hearing about Jesus. Jacob really loves hearing about God, and he loves the concept of prayer. And he had a lot of respect in both churches that we went to. But some of my friends that were involved in the CRC and the like worship and the prayer teams, because like we went to, they would have, if something came up, they would have like people come in for specific times of prayer. You could join, they'd sit in a circle, people would just pray. And the one day Jacob wanted to go, there was a man who was in hospital. I don't know what it was, something wrong with his stomach. And he was really sick. And there was me and my one friend who had our eyes open, because, everybody closes their eyes when they pray. In church, you just you stick your head down, you close your eyes, and then you pray. But I was interpreting everything for Jacob. So if you're in a deaf church, or if you're with a deaf person in a hearing church, you don't close your eyes because you can't talk to each other. So I was interpreting for him. And when it got around the circle to his turn, my friend was on the other side. She was watching Jacob. And I said, do you want to pray something? And he basically prayed, like he had very, very few times he used his hands to communicate at that time of his life. He would be in his upper teens, maybe early 20s. And I don't know how you define the prayer, but he basically, he said, yeah, he wanted to pray. And he basically kind of did this stirring motion of something and then sewing something up. And then he said, amen. And that was his prayer. So I'm kind of like, whatever he was thinking, whatever concept he had for the prayer, he was trying to shift, to fix whatever was wrong, in the person's injury, and have it, just say, and then sew it back up. That was his prayer, so yeah, it matters to him a lot. He loves prayer. We went to, again, it was an outside the church ministry, but there was a place in North Carolina that was, we were building a prayer house up the hill, top of the mountain kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we would go and visit for programs sometimes, and Jacob would go up and help them with the building. And he would ask about it for forever. Have they finished the prayer house? How is he like? So very few signs, very simple questions, but yeah, it really mattered to him. That that there's a good, and he still talks about it. That he likes that there's a place for people to go to pray. So yeah, spiritual things matter to him. And other people, like the people that I said would watch us in church for, how he was reacting to me interpreting the sermon, and things like that. And people they gravitated to him, just kind of, they saw a lot of goodness in him. So yeah. And he's not a perfect person. I mean, he's acted out quite a lot. There's things that, we both kind of go, yeah, that wasn't a good thing. Sorry, that was, these were the bad areas of life. But it matters to him, how we behave and, what we do and whether we pray. And yeah, it actually does matter to him a lot.
Yeah. For me, I think it was two big concepts. Everyone being made in the image of God, as well as by their fruits you should know them. So within my previous edition, there was an idea that every witness is good to some extent, where every witness is approachable. And how that sort of expanded was theologically, I believe two things. I believe that each person was interesting, and each person wanted to talk to me at the funeral, and that was really true. So what that sort of did to me was like, yeah, I was like completely afraid, completely didn't really know how to handle these situations, but I sort of just, you know, re-engineered like how social situations work, where it's like, okay, you ask a bunch of questions about them, you learn pieces of information about them, you, you ask more questions about those pieces of information, and then you remember those pieces of information to use in other conversations to say, oh, I know this friend who does this thing, and I'm gonna contribute to that. And I think like, um, how I learned so many interesting stories because I was like, well, if I don't have good stories, I'll just steal them from other people. And yeah, and
Yeah,
that spiritual concept allowed me to, want to go to different churches, want to talk to a bunch of people, and it really worked on those qualities.
that's cool. Yeah. I'm just sitting here smiling because I'm thinking when you get to the end, you remember them part. That's where my brain has a little bit of issue. I love hearing people tell stories, but I forget them easily. So I tell people, tell me your story as many times as you want. I'll enjoy it every single time.
Yeah, I guess how I do it is I remember people through stories. So the stories are the people, and those are sort of intertwined. And where I'm like, oh, I learned this interesting fact, or I have this friend, and it's like, well, the reason I know the fact is because of the person, and I can't really think of the person without the fact. So I sort of like tie them in together.
That's interesting. For some reason, I'm thinking of Temple Grandin trying to define cat when all she has is a picture of all of the qualities of every single cat, and every single cat. She'll picture each one individually. When you're saying people's stories are like they're tied to them. I'm like, yeah, they actually are.
Yeah, because you don't really know people; you just only know the stories about them.
Neat. That is true. That is very true. Yeah. So Jacob doesn't actually go to church at the moment
Yeah.
because it would require an available staff to take him somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, if he did, I'm trying to think if there's still a deaf church in Milton where he lives. There was for a while, and I don't know if it's still there. But for sure, if we lived where we used to live, he would still be going and very involved with it. Yeah. And he liked doing a lot of the volunteer things that the churches do. Like, I don't know if the witnesses, because they're probably not doing like community service things.
They work on their own kingdom halls, and then they help. It's sort of an
Yeah.
total community service, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, because he likes, there were some of the food programs that were connected with town, not necessarily directly to town services, but there was a couple of different things where if people needed food, there was a program called, there's two, but one was called Food for Life,
Mm-hmm.
and a big truck would come to the church that we went to and drop off some like different foods, whether they were vegetables or different things. And then a team of volunteers would sort them out for however many families they were going to deliver them to. Jacob absolutely loved doing things like that because he thinks like hospitality and community service are important to him too. You know.
Another spiritual comment or idea that I think was like fundamental to me developing is that I think the social cost of dating was really high. And so what I mean by that is that everyone knew each other, right? And there was no dating not for marriage. And if you wanted to date, you had to pretty much talk to the pastors. But what that allowed pretty much was male and female friendships to become really strong because A, it was obvious if you were trying to date somebody. B, the social cost was so high. And C, you also had to be ready. So, you couldn't date if you were under 18. That was like no go. You had to basically be financially responsible for marriage, and they applied the idea of I think it's somewhere in Timothy they mentioned that idea. So like my two best friends are women, right? And it's always really hard to sort of explain that or like, oh yeah, I'm traveling with these two women and there's like completely platonic ideas. And it's because the system has sort of allowed me to do that. And it also like removed a lot of my fear of women because I was like, well, my two best friends are women. So I can talk to them, I can do everything like that. And yeah, and it didn't really seem like this divide because I think um, when a lot of autistic people or neurodivergent people go into dating, it's sort of this us versus them, or there isn't that really common understanding. So I'm really grateful for that sort of yeah, cross communication.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking I have a friend whose sons are hitting their teens. His wife works. He's at home with the kids and whatever. He has autism. The two boys have autism. The wife does not. Yeah. And I remember thinking, like that's a huge challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you actually, in the course of what your church was doing, you learned social skills and how to interact sort of generically with like with people, and you could build your friendships with that's funny. Yeah, my best friends were boys growing up. I didn't understand girls. That's kind of a thing. Yeah, I had to teach myself a bit as an adult. um, but yeah, so that's interesting, and so do you think that benefits you still, even though you're out of the community now, like in terms of how you interact with people?
yeah. I think I really have a strong sense because like I think I have a well, I think I have a deeper understanding of like um, what women think. Not 100%, but I think I can like really be empathetic to women and really try my best to sort of understand what they're going through and sort of do that because there was another quote I think was they're your sister first before you become your wife, and to me that was like you should have as much care for them as possible and you should really respect them, and I try to really keep that idea with me. Yeah, as I'm sort of going on dates, but I think a lot of those qualities have sort of continued with me. I still try to challenge it, but it isn't the same. You can't replicate all those little individual ideas. But
No, and the community like out in the world, the community in general has way different values and rules than something like the witnesses would, where you understand you're sharing a common pattern, expectation, and practice in terms of how you engage in the relationships around you. That sounds like it makes for a really good, clear, like a good, clear canvas on which to kind of put your ideas.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, I'd
no,
be interested to talk to someone who's autistic who goes to an Orthodox liturgy and how they like the sort of ritual of that. Um, because that I think whenever I visited them, I think it's a very different experience because like the meetings at the Kingdom Hall are very orderly. Like they're meant to be orderly. They're envisioned to be orderly. They're you know each box you can know how each sermon how long it's going to take, and each part has a time next to it. So you can everyone in the audience knows if the person who's like doing a Bible reading is taking too long. So it's sort of like made for me because like I can like tomorrow's Thursday. There'll be a meeting tomorrow, right? Starts at 7. I know at 7:10 is one of the parts ends. I know also at 7:30 I know the one of the parts ends because you're able to memorize it so much. Yeah.
so you were saying you joined around 16.
Mm-hmm.
There's children there. Is it thing where the kids all stay in the service? Do they have a separate teaching? Do they like is it all one big group or?
It's all one big group.
And the kids must be very well behaved then, to a degree. Or more people are really good at ignoring one or the other or both.
I think when a baby cries, usually take him outside. So it's kind of complicated. So how it's structured is that there's sort of the main church, and then there's a separate room. It's called the back room. Technically, that's where pastors make decisions on things, but it's also where people, if you've been late, sort of go. So a lot of the people with families sometimes go there, but it's also only an hour and 30. And I think that's different between other churches is that every year the times change, so it isn't consistent. But what that means is like if you have a baby, right, you can get a 3:30 p.m. meeting instead of a 9 a.m. meeting, and so those it really works to sort of structure your time. Um,
Yeah. Very concept of families all going together to do something outside of the home is, that's a brave thing to do because you never know what kid's going to cry or what kid's going to, yeah.
yeah, and there was another neurodivergent kid and their family had a really hard time because the dress and grooming standards. Every kid had to be in a suit, and which meant that you know this kid had difficult with tactile things. So you'd show up in half a suit, and the rule was you couldn't have any responsibilities unless you showed up in a suit. So I think that kind of hindered him because there wasn't really sort of any exceptions available to him where like can he just show up in comfortable clothes? The clothes on this like silk aren't going to work. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, because the tactile is that's a big thing. Both my sons had tactile differences for sure. Um, yeah. Oh my gosh. I couldn't even get Joshua, my younger son, out of track pants until high school. Everything was track pants. And oh gosh, yeah. I asked Jacob the question about suits
yeah,
over supper. And I said, if we went to a church, you had to have your suit on every Sunday. I said, how would that go? Like give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. He was like, and then he kind of looks at his shirt and he says, this is better. Just a t-shirt.
yeah, 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 and I feel like that's got to be a big barrier for a lot of people. I think there is something about the suit that is like the suit was more comforting than my normal clothes. I think because of the preparation that I had to do, as well as the sort of symbol. I never wore a suit in normal life. It was sort of a separate piece of clothing, but it distinctified you in a different way. Um,
Oh yeah, that makes sense to me. Like I said, my younger son um, he had sensory differences, and he had somebody come in to assess them once, an occupational therapist, and she pointed out to me that she had been in earlier in the week. She came back to see him again, and even though he wasn't going out to recess the second time he saw her, when she said they were going to have a meeting, he had to put on his outdoor clothes, even though he was planning to take off his outdoor clothes. He
yes.
had to go through all the, and this is my normal child, which who I felt terribly sorry for compared to Jacob because um, he didn't get a label that made the school happy. Therefore, they picked on him.
Yeah.
Don't run your hands on the wall. Don't do this. Don't do that. you know. And um, And the explanation from the therapist they brought in was supposed to say to them, you have to adjust. Just know that this is a pattern that he follows, or that he's not doing things to be irritating. He's just very tactile, and you're going to go through these things. But yeah, people.
Yeah. I think tactile things were the hardest thing to break because it's not. I think with a lot of the social things for me, or at least a lot of the understandings, or like the lack of information, you can sort of like think it out. But a lot of the tactile things is the same as like touching a hot stove. Like velvet was something that was like I could not like. I'm even flexing my hands because it's a little difficult. But if I touch velvet, I'd want to like cut my hands off. Or if I scraped a chalkboard, I'd also want to cut my hands off. Like and then I think when I was younger, if any water spilt on the back of my shirt, I had to take it off. And I think it's sort of hard to understand that, but it's not. It's very much the same as like hearing nails on a chalkboard. Like it's something you have very little control over.
Almost, yeah, almost like if you sit on your leg and you get pins and needles and you can't stop the feeling, and you're convinced it's going to completely drive you insane within 3 seconds, and you want it to stop. Yeah. Some things are like that.
Some things are like that. Yeah. Those are most of the questions I have, and we've come up close to an hour. I guess. What are you grateful for, and what do you wish would change within religious communities in response to neurodivergence?
Probably the same thing, people. I'm very grateful. We had, and I always feel like I'm sounding irrational, or people will think I'm lying when I try to explain my relationship with church. In some respects, I had some trauma around church,
Mm-hmm.
kids, ex, and stuff. And it's kind of like the pins and needles. It doesn't quite go away. But at the same time, the exact same group of people cared about my kids, cared about us. I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity that I had to be in the group of people that I was in, and to make connections. Like we like I said, Jacob loved singing. He loved the friendship of singing and soup. Music and soup. And there was opportunities for us to participate. Participate, can't say that word. Participation is important, but it needs to make sense to you how you can participate and why you can or can't participate. So I'm really grateful that people took time when they were doing an addition to the church. One of the guys on the board gave Jacob a copy of it's the mock-up of the building they do. It's not the actual blueprint for the construction plans, but it's the one that shows what it's going to look like. And he said, Jacob loves to pray. Give him this and tell him he can, put it up on his wall at home, and he can pray while about the church building and how it's going to go. And he can have this and see it there, something to see, not just an idea in his head. I'm grateful for people like that. At the same time, sometimes the people were awkward, and with my younger son, there was a different kind of awkwardness. With Jacob, it was people would say to me, tell Jacob that, because nobody wanted to learn stuff. I mean, it's hard to learn a whole language. With his brother, he was shy, he was awkward, he didn't connect well. They did everything by age groups. and there was only 3 people in his age group. Him, there was young, his friend that he met in grade school, not through the church, but in grade school. They met in kindergarten, and so they're both up in Timmins now. I felt really sad and there was one girl, so 3 of them in that one age group, and that was all for the interactions. I felt sad for her because at least the boys had, each other to be, part of a group with, sort of thing, they in school. Some of these are the rules and these are how we do it work out really good, and sometimes, like the kid with the suit, they make things inaccessible. And how do you explain why they're inaccessible? Stuff like that. I wish that would change. People would have ideas, be creative, figure out a plan.
You mentioned, I guess, the people. Do you think if they were more informed on being neurodivergent, that things would change?
Some people, yes. Some of the people who could have maybe helped did it for work and they didn't want to do it in their free time too.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that going on. But yeah, I think yes. I would say that for church and for life. I've worked with 3 or 4 people who are neurodivergent. Most of them say autism or some variation. In the retail store where I work. One of the young guys was going off to college for a field. I forget, something maybe to do with, he wanted to do, he was into video games and media production. And he was surprised that he could have a conversation with me because that didn't happen at home. So there's that. But when I would point, for me to say, no, of course you can, or like there was literally about 4 or 5 people at work who I know of who have various things, and some of them get on really well because the people they work with know what to expect of them, and they see their good points, and they encourage them in those, and they try to be supportive in the things they're limited in. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, it can make a difference.
Yeah, I think for me, I just I hope the witnesses in the future make more allowances, I guess, for people on the spectrum, and also people's attitudes on those allowances change. I think when some people get allowances, they say they're not spiritual enough, that they don't have the same sort of wisdom with them. But I'm grateful for all the systems they have in place, all the steps, all the really to get you from somebody who is unable to be really social or is unable to understand social situations to pretty much knocking on random people's doors and probably talking about the one thing they don't want to talk about on a Saturday morning. So yeah, and I guess the one thing I hope in the future is that more systems sort of implement that for people with neurodivergence. So in schools, saying, "Can you talk to one random person today? How does it seem to be in the social situation?" And sort of believing in them more. Because I think in my experience, it was either, well, that's how this kid is. It's not going to change. And I think believing more and more that people have potential is what I hope.
Belief in potential is very important. And acceptance of the limitations, and treating both sides of that with respect. Jacob would have moments where he'd blow up and lose it on me, and we would go out for coffee the next morning and sit quietly with a piece of paper and draw it out together.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, let's just have a look at what happened. That's life. So yeah. And then you have a very kind heart. I see that because my kids have a very kind heart, and you remind me of them. It presents when you talk to people.
Thank you. I try. You know, I got a lot of work on, but you know, trying to follow that Jesus guy, see how he does.
Yep. Walking on water, floating in the air. No.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna read Garth's comments, and then I think I'll wrap it up. Garth made one comment that I wanted to sort of poke out. Garth mentioned, I do think that challenging people with autism is always good long term, in the same way that challenging anyone else can be beneficial. Yeah, and I think the question we just have to figure out in the future is like, what are the good challenges that we can do, and what is available at somebody's level. So, yeah, I mean, a goal I hope to do in the future is probably volunteer to help autistic kids. And, yeah, give them good challenges and believe in them when we can. So, yeah,
That's a good
those are
goal.
my final thoughts. Do you have any final thoughts, Sandy?
You're reminding me of my writers group that has me and two guys that have autism in it, as well as some, I'd say normal, but they're really not people.
Yeah,
We're normal. They're something.
we're fine. Yeah, what is it?
And I see that my my ongoing thought is how much I love people who are being who they are in front of other people in ways that make them go, oh well, yeah, I get that. Like
Yeah,
I could do that too. You know, now the word's not going to come to me. I'm old.
I struggle with that too. It's not an old thing. Okay, anything else, or I'll end the stream now.
I'm good. And no, that would be awesome. Can
Okay.
chat some other time if you ever have some other interesting questions and topics. I think that's a really good one for people to hear. Good idea.
Thanks again for coming. And as Jacob says, please donate to Fountain of Comfort. Please, 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 please. We're trying to do good things. Thanks again, everybody, and have a nice night.